I'm back with another video about my TX486 SLC. This is the board I just fixed in my last video, and there is still a problem on the board. That issue was already there in my previous video, and if you look closely at the footage, you will see that the time has a problem. Look at this. It jumps 3 seconds at a time. Like this, your day has 8 hours per day, not 24. So this problem was always there, even in my previous video. And today we will try to figure out why this is happening and what is the cause for it. So there are ways to figure out and test your real-time clock circuit. This is the circuit that is responsible to keep the time when the system is powered off. And this time right now is kept by the BIOS. If I just go to DOS, we will get a copy of the current time, and DOS will do something internally to keep its own time. We can test if our real-time clock circuit works correctly by using checkit. So let's quickly go into checkit and let's look for a test called real-time clock. And you can already see we failed the first test. And let's just wait until the last one finishes as well. And you can see on the top, the timer for the real-time clock was running so fast, but also the last test failed. So let's go through these 4 tests. The first test is compare the real-time clock time to DOS time. So this is what I said before. There is going to be a copy of the current date and time handed over once DOS takes over as an operating system. And then you can always compare what's the time in DOS versus what's the time that is available through the BIOS or the real-time clock chip. And here we can see that we were already about 1 minute and 4 seconds apart from when DOS took over and the time when we started checkit and it performed its tests. Then the second test is compare the real-time clock date to the DOS date. So yes, the date didn't change, that's okay. And then we have the real-time clock alarm test. I guess this is not affected by our issue that we are having on this board. But finally, we have another test. Maybe this is just a test that takes the current time snapshot and then it waits for a given period. And then it compares what's the time in DOS and what's the time that the real-time clock chip reports. But yeah, clearly there is an issue. And the question is, how can something like this happen? And where is this time generated and why does it fail? Here we can get a little bit more information on the next screen. So you see that the DOS time was 20:29:25, but the real-time clock was already at 20:30:30. So that is the 1 minute and 4 seconds that those two clocks are apart. The date was successful, the real-time clock alarm was successful, and then we have 12 seconds in DOS, but the real-time clock already passed 67 seconds in that period. So every 12 seconds that elapsed under DOS were 67 seconds on the real-time clock chip. That reminds me of that one movie where they land on that one planet where 1 second is like years on planet Earth or something. Anyway, so this is our problem, and this was there from the very beginning. Surprisingly, this didn't cause any issues with the games that we had or with the benchmarks. Or did they? I have no idea how it could be, but well, I hope they didn't, because otherwise all the benchmarks that I ran before are completely useless. So now let's have a look at the board and figure out what is responsible for keeping the time on our board when it's not on. Okay, I hope you can see this well. So this is the board I recently fixed, and this is a perfect board because it has a very limited number of components. So you can see there are just a few resistors, transistors, capacitors. These ones here are resistor networks, like this one here, this black one. And otherwise, well, we have more capacitors, resistors, and transistors. We have our CPU, which I gave a little heatsink. Here we have a crystal or a oscillator. Then there are a few passive components. This one here is the chipset. And then we have these 3 major ICs here. Otherwise, there's nothing on the board. I mean, yeah, we have the memory, but I can remove these. Otherwise, there is really not much going on. So we have here a keyboard controller which surprisingly doesn't have any markings. This chip is completely blank. I have absolutely no idea what type of keyboard controller this is. Then we have the BIOS chip here. Unfortunately, I removed the sticker here because I wanted to see what markings this chip has. I wanted to make a backup, but it just has basically the model number of the board printed on it. I think this is something very common to PC chips boards, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, it's very difficult to figure out what is going on. Luckily, we have a third chip here with a proper model number, the W85C168, to which I couldn't find a datasheet. However, this is our real-time clock chip. And one function this chip has is to keep track of our date and time when the system is powered off. And then through a external battery or the built-in battery that is on that board, it keeps the time updated and counts every second. Well, if it would count the seconds, because it counts 3 seconds. So now we need to figure out why that is happening. Unfortunately, as I said, I couldn't find a datasheet for this chip, but with a datasheet of a similar real-time clock chip, we may be able to figure out how our chip works. So let's scroll down and see if we can find some pinout diagram. And you can see here that we have all kinds of pins related to addressing. And we seem to have 2 pins that are somehow related to oscillators, OSC. And then we have other pins here that are not really important to us right now. I think the 2 pins that are important is OSC1 and OSC2. So pin 2 and 3. So on our chip, this would be pin number 2 and pin number 3. These 2 here on the bottom. Okay, so then let's continue, because right now we don't know what these 2 pins are for. So here in the block diagram, we can see that OSC1, it seems to be a input pin, but it also gives an output. So OSC2 seems to be an output. Let's see, maybe we can find some more details about these pins. Here we have some frequencies, megahertz, kilohertz. So this is something that I'm familiar with. These are usually these tiny barrel-shaped crystals or oscillators that are on mostly all boards of that era. Now we get into something. Okay, so signal descriptions. There we go. Okay, so we have OSC1 and OSC2. Time base inputs. So they're both inputs. My bad. So they're both inputs. The time base for the time functions may be an external signal or the crystal oscillator. External square waves at 4.1 megahertz, 1.04 megahertz, or 32.768 kilohertz. So I have a feeling we have to look for 32 kilohertz because this is just what I have seen so many times. And if you look at the Dallas real-time clock chip that had that battery included in the housing and it was just filled with epoxy, it has one of these round looking oscillators integrated in that housing as well. I opened one of these to look inside and there was really one of these oscillators in there. So I'm pretty sure we're looking for 32.768 kilohertz. And I believe that the crystal that we're looking at is this one, because this is the only barrel-shaped crystal oscillator on this board. One connection from our oscillator should go to OSC1, which is pin number 2 here. So let's see if I can get a connection here. No. Let's switch our probes. Okay. And no. This one should beep. Let's see. What's the resistance? 4.7 mega ohms. So I think the easiest way is to just measure the frequencies we get on our 2 pins. And I want to verify first if my multimeter will show us the correct frequency. Since I believe that we will stay within the 32 kilohertz range, I just want to make sure my multimeter is able to show that frequency. I believe this multimeter can measure up to 10 megahertz, and there should be an 8 megahertz clock signal on that board, and this is the ISA or AT clock frequency. This is on our ISA bus, pin number 20, I believe. And you can see 7.15 megahertz. So this is our bus frequency of our AT bus. So let's see what we get from our chip here. And you can see we get 80 kilohertz, but we were supposed to get 32. Now you can do the math and you see that we are in the range of 2.5 to 3 times the frequency. So could this be our problem? Let's see what OSC2 reads. So we get about the same frequency that is on this pin. So let's see where this pin on our board goes to. So we are talking about this pin. Does it go somewhere we can measure a beep? I mean, somewhere this pin needs to connect to. So I found out that this pin goes to one of the ICs that was located below the keyboard connector. And I think it's one of these pins here. Let's see, maybe it's the other chip here. Yes, so this pin is connected to this pin of, what is this? This is a 4069. So let's quickly go and open a datasheet for this chip. So this is an inverter circuit. Let's quickly check if we find a pinout diagram. I guess this one. So pin 1 is this one here, and we are at pin 8, and it goes to pin 9. So I guess the whatever signal comes in from pin 9. So this pin and this pin are related. Let's see if we can figure out if this one goes somewhere to our crystal. No, still nothing. Question is, where is this pin going? Ah, so it goes to this resistor. Yes. So this pin goes to this resistor, and this one is a, let's go back to ohms. This one here is a 2 mega ohm resistor. Okay, and where does this one go? Does this go to another pin on one of these logic chips? Yes. So, and then this one goes back here. So we're inverting twice or what? Okay, a few possibilities. Either this chip is not working correctly or this oscillator is not working correctly. I did test this chip in my programmer, but maybe it doesn't test it in high frequencies. There are definitely some loops going through this inverter here, in this inverter chip, but it definitely connects to this oscillator. Sorry for the very bad setup here. But here you can see 14.3 megahertz. This is what I would expect. But here, on this friend, I don't get anything. So yeah, and here we can see our 80 to 90 kilohertz range again, which also is on this pin, I think. Yeah, but this here is a better square wave. This one here looks very poor. So let's see what we get on these chips here. This is our connection to our crystal, which doesn't make any sense. It's almost like it's floating. None of these pins probably will have a proper square wave or a oscillation that we would expect. I think it's our barrel-shaped oscillator here. I will just replace this little friend here. And I will borrow it from one of my donor boards here, which is just a Pentium 3 board. Do we have one? Yes, here. So here's a barrel-shaped crystal, and I think sometimes it's printed on the silk screen what value this is, but this most likely is a 32 kilohertz crystal here. Okay, so let's get this crystal off, which I believe is the culprit. Unfortunately, this is soldered to the board and I need to get this out first. Lift. There we go. There we go. I have it. Oh, splashed. There we go. And let's clean out the vias here for our new crystal. And then hopefully we should be able to measure different frequencies. So 1 and 2. And let's put our new crystal in there, which has the writing 32768. And now let's install our new crystal. I think this is the old one. Yes, this is the old one. I'm not going to keep this anyway. So here's our new one with the writing on it. Oops. Okay. So there we go. Now let me clean up and then we can check if our frequencies are okay now. It is a little bit better, but it's still not okay. So let's quickly go to check it and see if we got some improvement from our real-time clock tests. So the first test doesn't say anything. This is just the time difference from the time MS-DOS took the timestamp. The more important one is the one on the bottom. So here we have now 40. I think before it was like 54 or something like this. I think this is again in the next screen. Yeah, so it's 12 seconds. Now we have 52. Before it was something like, I think 67. So we did improve, but we didn't solve it. So what's the issue? Could it be this one chip, the 4069 or whatever it was called? I have to check. So it looks like I get nowhere with a time issue on my yellow board, but instead of waiting now for some new chips to arrive, I looked through the pile of old motherboards that I still have to repair or restore, and I found this one. This board is a 486 board, the 495 SLC. Unfortunately, it has a lift socket, low insertion force. They are never low insertion. Once a CPU is in there, you have a fun time trying to remove it. So I don't like these boards at all. If I would restore this board in the future, I would also try to replace this socket. I really don't like them. But this board has the chip that I'm looking for. This is also a Toshiba 4069. It is the same chip that could be the reason for our timing issues on the other board, but I'm not sure. All I could measure were just not the right frequencies. Okay, the new chip is on the board. Let's see what happens. Okay, we are getting a post, and yes, check some failure because I disconnected everything while soldering this chip. Let's see what we get when we look at the time. Okay. That looks promising. Let's see. I will set up the BIOS. Let's go to check it and see if it detects any issues. Okay, everything is set up. Let's boot into DOS and see if we have solved the issue. So was it really just this hex inverter that was the issue? Let's see. Real-time clock check. Okay, we are only 1 second apart. I think this is fixed. Look at the seconds, they're fixed. Yes, we fixed it. Ah, I'm so happy. Now my board will record the correct time. So it was the hex inverter. Even though this chip passed using my programmer, something with the timings was off. Let's try this one more time. I just want to make sure everything works correctly. Let's go into the BIOS and see what's the time and date. Yes, this looks perfectly fine. So yeah, now I want to go ahead and test this one more time with the oscilloscope. I want to see if we get now the 32 kilohertz from our crystal. But just for sanity, let's verify our tests here and check it one more time. Okay, 2 seconds apart. But you can see that the real-time clock and the DOS clock, they change in sync. And it passed. So this was the issue. This was the issue why the clock did not work properly. Now before I go, let's just quickly verify what frequency we get on the crystal. It's exactly 32.7, a value I was never able to measure before. So yeah, it must have been this tiny chip that caused all that trouble. But now it is finally out and it will go back to the scrapyard. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was interesting to you. Let me know what you think about this project in the comments. And a big shout out to my Patreons. Take care and bye bye.